Yuji's domain expansion revealed, and its power to kill Sukuna has just been confirmed. And after Inhuman Makio Shinjuku Showdown Part 36, we've finally moved on to a new chapter title. You know it's a big deal when that happens, especially this late in the game, so make sure to stay tuned because this is probably the final mini-arc in the series. You guys know the drill. If you enjoy my JJK content and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now for that YouTube algorithm. And if you want to make sure that you won't miss my future JJK videos, do me a huge favor and subscribe right now. It is completely free and it helps me out a lot. And now let's jump into it, spoilers and all. The last chapter was crazy because in the middle of an epic fight against Yuji, Sukuna pulled off a second Black Flash, and that allowed him to regain his reverse curse technique, and so he was able to regenerate his arms. After all that fighting and sacrificing to weaken him, it looked like everything went right back to square one, with Sukuna being at full power again and just seconds away from destroying everyone. In that very moment, Yuji shocked us all by launching his own domain expansion. To make matters even more interesting, it didn't seem to be a conventional domain. Rather, it placed him in his school uniform and Sukuna back into the way he used to look like when he was still inside Yuji's body. They both found themselves at a train station, and Sukuna was confused because he was wondering what was going on here. And I think everyone reading the manga was also wondering the same thing, but Yuji just smiled and said, "Let's go, Sukuna." Some people even thought that the fight might be over because this scene reminded them of when Gojo was defeated, as in a bunch of things actually happened off screen and we missed it and now we were seeing the weird aftermath. But never fear, the new chapter revealed that this is not the case. I didn't personally think that Gege would do this to us again, and I think at this stage of the game, important things shouldn't be happening off screen anyway. That Gojo moment was very controversial. Some people liked it, but some people really hated it and complained about it a lot, so I'm glad that we're not gonna get into one of these crazy controversies again, at least not yet. The new chapter is called That Day, and it completely switches up the momentum of the story and of the titling of the chapters. For the past 36 chapters, they were called Inhuman Makio Shinjuku Showdown followed by a number. But now the narrator says Itadori, Domain Expansion, although this place is making it sound like even the narrator is acknowledging that something weird is going on. This is no ordinary domain, especially considering that moments earlier, Yuji and Sukuna were engaged in a vicious battle to the death. We're told that in the midst of combat with a sorcerer, it's rare that you might connect with your opponent. This phenomenon seems to be some sort of side effect since cursed energy is rooted in human emotions. Sukuna says he's experienced this before, but it's different this time. He asks Yuji, "What is this, your domain?" And Yuji is totally taking the lead and setting the tone here, saying, "Be quiet, I was struggling just as much, so I don't completely understand it either." It's kind of hilarious that even Yuji doesn't seem 100% sure about what's going on, but I like how he's just going with it. Yuji says, "I wanted some time to talk with you, at least hang out with me for a bit." So yeah, he just wanted to hang out with the King of Curses, just chat a bit. You know how it is. Oh man, I love how laid back Yuji can be after everything that's happened. And if this really is Yuji's domain, which it does appear to be, then it is definitely the complete opposite of Sukuna's. This domain where the opponents can seemingly just take it easy and chat could be the single most unsettling domain that Sukuna has ever experienced, since he is someone who lives for a good fight and for fierce, direct aggression. I'm sure that a domain like this truly confuses him, and this could turn out to be his biggest weakness. This could change everything. Then we get Yuji pretty much treating Sukuna like a friend that came to visit his hometown for the first time, and now he's kind of like showing him around. He keeps telling Sukuna things about his life and childhood, and Sukuna really doesn't seem to care at all, but interestingly enough, Sukuna is going along with it for far longer than you might expect. So this may be a feature of the domain expansion. It may be having some sort of genjutsu-like effect on Sukuna, making him more likely to let his guard down and comply. Again, this could prove to be the decisive factor in this seemingly endless fight to take down the King of Curses. The scenery of the town is beautiful, and it's actually a stark juxtaposition to all the fighting and brutality of the previous chapters. It feels refreshing, and I'm sure it's just the calm before the storm, as the last page implies, but it's still fascinating to see, and we'll talk more about that last insane page in just a little bit. But for a long time I felt like Yuji was a bit of a blank canvas compared to most shonen protagonists. It's like the story didn't let us get too close to him and his backstory, so I'm glad that here we finally get some characterization and backstory for him before his high school days. we finally have a chance to get a bit of a better understanding of him and where he came from. First, he points to a statue saying, "Oh, look, it's the demon sword dance," and Sukuna's like, "I don't know." Yuji responds with, "Not to worry, it's not something that people besides the locals would know." This whole chapter has a very mortal enemies talking about the nice weather kind of vibe, and in a way it's pretty cool to imagine Yuji and Sukuna if they were rivals in like a slice of life or sports anime or something. But in another way, all of this is very unsettling because you know that something insane and violent can happen at literally any time. Yuji reveals that until he was about 6 or 7 years old, he lived around here before moving back to Sendai. He was born in Sendai, but he lived here due to his grandpa's work. So we're finally getting some more info about Yuji's grandpa, who was obviously important to him, but the story just hasn't focused that much on him since the beginning. And since we know that the grandpa was aware of Kenjaku and Kenjaku's possession of Yuji's mom, I feel like there's still more to Yuji's grandpa and parents than has been revealed, and maybe we're finally gonna get some of those reveals in the near future. Yuji starts being pretty vulnerable here, talking about attending a friend's grandpa's funeral here in the past and wondering if that friend would have come to his grandpa's funeral if the roles were reversed. It's almost like he's opening up to Sukuna, like he's talking to a close friend. He's practically thinking aloud as he's coming to terms with how he feels about how much things have changed. It's something that most of us can relate to. I too am always mentioning how much busier the city I live in is compared to how I was back when I was a kid. There are more crowds, more people, and more cars. My point is that Gege is doing a good job of making Yuji relatable, something that was missing for me a little with Yuji because there just isn't that much that we know about him in terms of his life and past. And it really does feel like the kind of deep conversation about childhood and growing up that you would find in an emotional slice of life anime like Clannad After Story. And the comment about Yuji wondering if his grandpa's friend would have come to his grandpa's funeral reminds us of the beginning of the series, where his grandpa was alone except for Yuji, and he told Yuji not to be like him. He told Yuji not to be a loner, but to die surrounded by people. It's really nice to see Yuji being human like this and still thinking about his grandpa, who we know was so important to him, despite the fact that the story hasn't been giving too much screen time to this kind of stuff and it's mostly been focused on action. The more I think about it, the more I feel like something like this was necessary to deepen Yuji's character and to make us care even more about him and relate to him as our protagonist. We then get to an especially relatable part for me where Yuji takes Sukuna through a park where he used to play the most. He says that most of the playground equipment is gone, but considering he nearly died when he got his foot stuck in the box swing, he supposes that it's to be expected. The dangerous stuff had to be removed to meet new safety standards, and yeah, of course that makes sense, but it still gives you the feeling that a certain part of your life is gone now and it will never come back. And that old playground equipment kind of represents that loss. Again, very relatable stuff, and I've definitely had the same type of feeling about certain places and playgrounds in my own hometown. We then get to a pretty important part of the chapter where Yuji and Sukuna notice some flowers. Yuji thinks they're morning glories, but Sukuna corrects him saying, "It's hydrangeas, you moron." Yuji says, "I get it, it was just a careless mistake," and this really does feel kind of like a trip down memory lane with friends teasing each other about knowing flowers and stuff like that. It almost feels like Deku and Bakugo walking around their hometown and talking about their childhood, and obviously Sukuna is Bakugo in this conversation. Sukuna acts like he doesn't care about any of those things, and maybe it's true, but you gotta think that these thoughts about the impermanence of things had to have crossed his mind considering how long he's been around. I wonder if there's a chance of Talk no Jutsu making a difference here, since if you think about it, Yuji's grandpa's personality was kind of rough like Sukuna's. But we know he personally didn't like being alone even though he had a gruff and stubborn personality. Maybe Sukuna really is profoundly lonely after over 1,000 years of being the ruthless king of curses. And maybe Yuji can really get through to him with all this talking and walking down memory lane. Yuji then goes on to wonder aloud about who is responsible for choosing the types of trees along the streets, and this is now starting to sound like a Joe Rogan podcast. Yuji also calls out Sukuna for knowing the names of flowers. You know, like, why would such a ruthless killer pay attention to such delicate things as flowers? But Sukuna tries to play it off as, "Oh, I just know it because of Megumi's memories." It feels like in a very subtle way we are getting to know Sukuna a bit better. Yuji says that if that's the case, then Sukuna must remember all of the stuff he is showing him from his own memories back when Sukuna was inside his body. But Sukuna says that he doesn't bother going around reading every single memory. And Yuji says, "Oh, I see." And it's interesting that the knowledge of flowers and which exact flower they are is something that came from Megumi's memories, allegedly, But normally, Sukuna doesn't go around reading random memories. That's definitely interesting. They then go to a place where you can catch crayfish, and Yuji convinces Sukuna to give it a shot, teasing him by asking if the strongest sorcerer can't even catch some crayfish. Sukuna seems to get a bit competitive and says, "Silence." He then grabs the makeshift fishing rod and they both catch one. One is small and the other is bigger, but it's pointed out that the smaller Japanese crayfish are more rare, so who's the winner ends up being up for debate. With all this bonding, I wouldn't be surprised if Sukuna accidentally starts having some thoughts about Yuji being his long-lost brother like Todo and Choso did. Maybe that's part of the Genjutsu-like powers that Yuji seems to have, and which could be at their absolute peak within this strange domain expansion. Yuji shows Sukuna a department store which opened when he was 5. This store eliminated the small local shops in the area, which is sad and happens all too often, and this killed a bunch of unique places and replaced them with copy and paste megastores. Yuji says that it's unfortunate that so many shops were forced to close, but the new megastore does have a movie theater upstairs, so that makes up for it in his eyes. So, as we know, there are both pros and cons to change, and they are both being highlighted here. A lot of this domain expansion journey has been pretty emblematic of the general human experience. It's all about nostalgia and growing up and the passage of time and the ups and downs of life and so on. Yuji talks a bit about the scenery, how some of it is gray because of the city, but if you go outside the city, there's plenty of greenery. Sukuna again says that he doesn't really care, but he is still walking alongside Yuji and going along with everything. Yuji says that he used to catch grasshoppers in the rice fields and fill a bug cage with them, but they seem to be missing now. He wonders if the pesticides evolved or something. Again, it's all about how things are changing, technology is changing, and nothing is as it was before. Sukuna is losing patience at this point and he says, "Hey," but Yuji says, "Hold on, there are still places I wanted to visit." And this is what I'm saying. Sukuna is clearly annoyed, but he is still going along with this, which is pretty out of character for him. All of this seems to be a part of Yuji's strange domain. And even though it's a bit frustrating that we don't understand what exactly is happening, it's also kind of intriguing. They see some horses and the panel is beautifully illustrated. Like I said, a lot of beautiful illustrations in this chapter showing the beauty of life. Yuji says horses really are great. No matter how many times I see them, their faces always seem bigger than I remember. His grandpa used to take him to this farm often, and his grandpa was basically both parents for Yuji because his mother and father were not in his life. Again, Yuji's grandpa is being mentioned a lot here, and it's clear that he is very important for Yuji. We don't know what exactly happened to Yuji's parents other than Kenjaku possessed his mother and the grandpa knew that something was wrong, but clearly at some point early on in Yuji's childhood, his parents stopped being in the picture and his grandpa had to take all the responsibilities onto himself. Yuji continues by talking about the soft serve ice cream that they used to serve here, and one time he spent all his pocket money on it and he ended up eating so much that he threw up. This prompts Sukuna to say that, "Oh, I guess you didn't have a brain even at that early age." Then they try some archery and perhaps unsurprisingly, Sukuna is awesome at it and Yuji says, "Whoa, Sukuna, you hit a bullseye." Sukuna's like, "Of course I'm better than you," and Yuji replies, "I guess that's right, because back in Sukuna's time, archery was a lot more common. Back then, people often had to know how to shoot arrows just to survive, so it makes sense that Sukuna would be a lot more skilled." We then jump seasons and it's suddenly winter. Yuji says that in winter, snow statues are lined up for the snow festival, and he wonders if they still make them. It's been snowing less in Sendai too, it just doesn't feel like winter unless the snow piles up. And I guess, again, this is some commentary about change and perhaps also about global warming. Yuji thinks back to spending winter and celebrating the holidays with his grandpa in a very simple way. And again, a lot of this really does focus on Yuji's grandpa. At this point, Sukuna has finally reached his limit. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, but Yuji replies by saying, "Well, alright, I feel like I've shown you what I wanted to show you anyway." Sukuna says that all of these memories and stories that Yuji is telling him are a hideous, cluttered mess, and he has no idea what Yuji is trying to get at. What is he trying to say? Why is he doing all of this? Yuji gets into a lengthy philosophical speech at this point, but what I get out of it is that he wanted to get to know Sukuna better and to understand him. And he wanted to see if opening up to Sukuna would evoke any emotion within him or awaken any humanity in him. Yuji wanted to see if Sukuna would recognize any value in human life aside from just how that person died and whether he died like a brave warrior or not. But none of this seems to have moved Sukuna at all. None of it has brought out any humanity or emotion in him. The truth is that Yuji deeply loathes Sukuna, but he also pities him, and by taking him on this journey inside his domain, he was trying to show him kindness. Sukuna is surprised when he realizes this, and in that moment Yuji reveals a shocking twist. He tells Sukuna that he has the ability to end his life, but if Sukuna agrees to release Megumi and return to Yuji's body, then Yuji will let him live. This blatant threat infuriates Sukuna, and he's about as angry as we've ever seen him, if not angrier. Sukuna says that Yuji thinking he can kill him is a grave misunderstanding, and the King of Curses won't stop until he slices Yuji into bits. He vows to annihilate every person that Yuji holds dear right in front of his eyes, just to show that the value of these people in Yuji's mind means absolutely nothing to Sukuna. As the narrator explains, Sukuna turns down Yuji's offer with anger and malice, and this leads us into the final climactic fight between our protagonist Yuji and the final villain Sukuna, the King of Curses. And wow, when Yuji said he has the power to kill Sukuna, he didn't look like he was kidding or bluffing. There is something about this domain that we don't understand yet, but it's all going to become clear very soon. What do you guys think? Is being stuck inside this domain hurting Sukuna in some way? Did this domain that is so different from what he is used to throw Sukuna off balance and allow Yuji to take advantage? What is going to happen next? Are we gonna see a big Yuji power-up? Is the domain going to change in the next chapter to something completely different and much more deadly for Sukuna? Don't forget to leave your feedback down below. Full power Yuji Unleashed versus Final Form Sukuna is going to be a fight for the ages. If you're looking for another epic JJK video to watch next, check out my full JJK playlist, link on screen and in the description. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to let me know. And if you want to catch more JJK videos right here on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications.